Discussions in this show should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult with your investment professional before making important investment decisions. Securities offered through registered representatives of Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors Incorporated, a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Clear Vista Financial are not affiliated. You are listening to the Spend Life Well Show with Kingdom Advisor Mark Trice and Jesse Hamilton. Mark and Jesse are passionate about seeing you spend life well. If you want to save for and invest in the future, then this show is for you. Call now and join the conversation with your financial questions. 512-452-1120. 512-452-1120. Mark and Jesse will answer your questions and discuss practical financial principles based on a foundation of biblical wisdom. So if you're ready to quit worrying about your finances and begin to spend life well, then call 512-452-1120. And let's meet your hosts, Mark Trice and Jesse Hamilton.
All right. Good morning, everyone. We're glad that you've chosen to join us for a few minutes here on the Spend Life Well show. I'm Certified Kingdom Advisor Mark Trice, and I want to welcome you to our Spend Life Well show where we apply biblical wisdom to your financial life. I'm joined in the studio today by my co-host and fellow financial professional, Jesse Hamilton.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the show.
Today's verse is Proverbs 22:6, which says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." And we'll get into that a little bit more later in the program. You can call us right here in the studio. This is a live call-in show with your financial questions at 512-452-1120. That's 452-1120. Jesse, what do we have in store for the listening audience today?
Well, on today's program, we will discuss biblical stewardship in our first segment and how it's the foundational to financial planning. We'll also talk about what happened in the financial markets this week. It was a very interesting week. We saw a lot of movement. And then we're going to look at whatever every investor needs to consider to protect your wealth. In our final segment, on the last part of our show today, we're going to share how to properly teach your kids how to handle money. So that should be a very interesting segment. Get into some details, and we'd love to hear from you. That phone number is 512-452-1120.
Well, Jesse, this was a really phenomenal week. Now, not in a good way necessarily, because there was continued a high amount of volatility in the stock markets this week. We saw stocks go on a roller coaster ride, and we're going to talk more about that later in today's program. But how was your week, Jesse?
It was great. I mean, the markets were difficult. You know, it was a hard week to be an investment manager. But other than that, I'm feeling great and had a really nice week. How was yours, Mark?
Really good. And we should clarify, if you're an investment manager that does nothing for their clients, it was a very difficult week to stomach, but we'll talk more about that in just a moment. It's nice and crisp and cool. What was it last on Wednesday? It was 82 degrees outside, and woke up the next morning and it was 21. But that's Central Texas weather for you, where we have winter in short burst of a day or two. And but we're glad that you've chosen to join us today. Remember, you can call us in the studio at 512-452-1120. You can also send us an email at radio@spendlifewell.com. That's radio@spendlifewell.com. We will answer your questions on the air. If we don't get to it today, we'll make sure we answer it next week or in the following week. So we'll respond to you as quick as possible on that. And sometimes we pull them out of our mailbag for answering questions on the show.
Yeah, we really enjoyed doing that. So we'll get into a couple mailbag questions later on in the show, but you can also watch us live on Facebook and other social media channels by visiting our website, spendlifewell.com. You can click on our radio tab, and you can even follow us on Facebook. That'll get you connected with what we're doing here. And on our website, you can also find previous shows, our broadcasts, and you can sign up for one of our upcoming educational webinars. And if you're interested in what those are, February 5th at 9:15 a.m., right after the show, we're going to have the monthly market update. And then February 15th, you're not going to want to miss this. We have the financial fitness checkup. That could apply to anybody listening today.
All right. Thanks, Jesse. Jesse, would you say that all spending decisions have an eternal consequence?
Eternal consequence? I don't know about that, but I would say no.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna debate with you a little bit today
Okay,
about that
let's do
because
it.
I believe that all of our spending decisions have both eternal and temporal consequences,
Okay.
and we'll get into that when we talk about biblical stewardship
Yeah.
here in just a moment. But there's this paradox that we face, especially for Americans. The more money you have, the more choices you have, which results in greater confusion and complexity to life. So the more you have, the less real freedom you have. Isn't that kind of an odd paradox, right?
It's
You would
extremely
think,
odd.
yeah, you would think that the more money I have, if I can just make a little bit more, then I'll have all the freedom in the world and everything will be great. And the thing is that actually creates more complexity in your financial life. And so sometimes when we think about these choices that we have to make, you know, uh, we compare ourselves maybe to a third world country or something where folks are living on just maybe even $1 a day, and yet we have plenty. There is plenty of things on the shelves in the grocery store. We usually have money to buy those things. It just puts things in perspective. It really how we may think that we're not well off here in the United States, but we really are. We really are.
Especially
So
in this service economy that we live in, a lot of people might believe that if I just make enough money, I'll just pay somebody to fix all my problems.
yeah, and that really that was my view of the world when I was a young man because I always felt, well, if I could just make another dollar, if I could just get a job that paid a little bit more, all my problems would be solved. And until I began to reckon with what God has to say about how we manage our finances, I was really going to be chasing that rabbit down many, many holes because I always thought that was the problem. I mean, the solution to the problem. If I just had a little bit more money, I would be able to solve my financial problems, and that's not the case. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what it means today to have follow biblical stewardship. I want to introduce a couple of scriptures here. We kind of talk about it. First Chronicles 29:11. This really puts it in perspective. And it says, this is verses 11, 12 in First Chronicles 29. Yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendor, for everything in heaven and earth is yours. Yours, Lord, is the kingdom. You are exalted as head over all. Wealth and honor come from you. You are the ruler of all things. And I want to just emphasize that because wealth and honor come from the Lord. And if we put that perspective here, and we can also think of other scriptures, especially in Matthew, the parable of the talents, Matthew 25, verses 14 through 30.
It's a great one.
Yeah, that's a good reminder of our responsibilities as biblical stewards. But biblical stewardship, in my mind, is the use of God given resources. And when we think about those resources, they might be things like our time, our talents, our treasure, which is kind of the focus of this show, is the treasure part of that, and truth and relationships. Relationships might be something that you haven't thought about, but these are things that we are required to manage as stewards of God's given resources. And those resources are there, Jesse, for the accomplishment of God given goals and objectives.
It seems like a greater picture in abiding in what God has for your life. It's just your treasure is a piece of that puzzle.
That's right. That's right. I mean, that's why we do this show. I mean, we want to share that wisdom with our listeners because we feel that money can be a barrier between us and our relationship with God. And we want to try to provide some guidance. And I got to be honest, Jesse, talking to you and talking to other listeners on the show, sometimes this is kind of therapy, right? Because
Right.
I think I don't want to put words into your mouth, Jesse, but I know I struggle with what's the right things to do with the money that I've been given and entrusted with. And it's not that I'm, an ungodly man or anything, but we face temptations all the time. And I was thinking about doing an improvement on the house last year and during COVID because it'd be great. We could have more activities at the house. And of course, my wife was supportive of that. But I didn't feel good about it. I didn't feel like that. I feel like that taking on that additional expense would be an additional burden that maybe God didn't want me to have right then. And so we've delayed that project. And so, I think that, we all struggle. And, if we want to know God's desire for us with our money, we just need to ask him. We need to talk to him, and we need to get into his word.
It's interesting what you said earlier in that statement, for the accomplishment of God-given goals and objectives. And a lot of times in our lives, our goals cannot be completed without the use of money in the short term and the long term. We're
That's
going to talk
right.
about that in a little bit later in this segment, but
Yeah,
I
yeah,
just
you're
thought that
right.
was an interesting statement you make. Accomplishing God-given goals and our finances is a crucial part of that.
Well, let me ask you a question, and we'll ask our listeners, because you can call in. I'd love to hear your opinion. Give us a call at 452-1120, 452-1120. We'd love to hear about what you think about this question, and you can call us anytime during the show. Jesse, so what are the practical consequences, or the implications, if you will, of accepting the biblical definition of stewardship versus a worldview of biblical stewardship?
Yeah, that's a challenging question for
Yeah, it's a
sure.
deep question, right?
It
Right.
is. It's taking what the Bible says, and the Bible does not say go out and spend $400 on this item. It's not that specific, and so I think the question here is getting to how do we make what the Bible says apply in our lives? What are the practical consequences?
Right. So one answer to that question, and I want to hear what the listeners have to say. Call us in at 452-1120. But stewardship of our resources that we've been given by God is the only area of the Christian life that cannot be faked. Right? You think
Right?
about it. We can't fake it, right? We can do a lot of faking when we go to church on Sunday and smile and say everything's great. There's that song out there. I can't remember who the artist is. It's like, I'm fine. I'm fine, but I'm not, and we can fake a lot of areas in our Christian life, but stewardship is the only area that really of Christian life that we cannot fake it, right?
Right.
The way that we spend our money is a measure of our real priorities. So I'll say that again. The way that we spend our money is a measure of our real priorities. And that's why I think that every spending decision is a spiritual decision.
Mark, I can't
And
remember if it was you that was telling me this, but I remember someone telling me in the past year or two that if you want to see a person's lifestyle and where their priorities lie, you can pull up their credit card statement and you can actually tell by what they're spending their money on. What do you think about that?
oh yeah, I mean we help families all the time. Sometimes they're trying to get out of debt, sometimes they're trying to maximize their wealth, and we ask them to share what they're spending. Now, we don't care what you spend your money on, but sometimes it comes up with some interesting observations, right? And so you can really tell by looking at someone's spending to see what their priorities are. But I give some examples here. Every spending decision is a spiritual decision, because I think that God can take whatever He wants whenever He wants, and if we believe this, that's really the beginning of the key to financial freedom.
What about
And
if I pull over, I'm driving, I pull over, I go to the gas station and I buy a Coke for $2.50?
well, have you been reading my mind? Because every once in a while I'll have that problem, because I know, and if my wife is listening, she's probably going to chime in and call the studio and say amen. But it's like, okay, I know that the Coke Zero is not the best thing for me, and I know that adds up over time, and I kind of have a little debate, and sometimes I might decide not to get that, or maybe I'll stick with my water or something. So yeah, it can be,
Well, I guess
that's unique for everybody. Yeah.
what comes to mind for me is these small little decisions start to form habits, and those habits become who you are. And so that's how I kind of see it as when you say every spending decision is a spiritual decision, it could be habit forming and spiritual habit forming as well.
Yeah, that's right. Jesse, let's talk about the some uses of money, because our show's about money. The 5 short-term uses of money?
Yes.
If you're listening, you might want to write these down. It's living expenses, right? Giving, taxes. We have to pay taxes. debt repayment, and then cash flow margin. What do we do with the excess? And that's really important to realize because there's really not any other use of money in the short run other than those 5 things. It's living expenses, giving, paying taxes, paying down debt, and then providing margin in your life with additional cash flow. But when we
Okay.
look at the long-term uses of money, they have a little bit different timeline and perspective. Long-term uses of money are financial independence, versus having to pay living expenses, charitable
Right.
giving, freedom from debt, okay, lifestyle desires, family needs, maybe even starting a new business. And so you can see a lot of us are stuck in this short-term uses of money. We're like living expenses, giving, we got to pay the bills. When we need to change our perspective to a long-term perspective, and that's part of what we want to talk about here on this show.
Yes.
Discussions in this show should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult with your investment professional before making important investment decisions. Securities offered through registered representatives of Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors Incorporated, a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Clear Vista Financial are not affiliated.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Mark Trice, Certified Kingdom Advisor. I'm on the line with my co-host, Jesse Hamilton, fellow financial professional here in our offices in Central Texas.
Hey, everybody.
Welcome back. So Jesse, let's go to the mailbag here, and every week we get a couple of questions. Let's go
Sure.
grab one of those today, and we'll answer that question on the air.
So we must have a listener watching in on Facebook because this person's actually from Nashville. Yeah, but they messaged us and said a very interesting and relevant question here, so I'll share it. It says, I wouldn't consider myself a sophisticated investor, but I do keep an eye on the market and the indexes a few times per week. Okay, that's great. He says, when the market starts to pull back like it did this week, what do you do to protect the client's money? And if you're exiting like that, is it just market timing?
That's a good question, and from that listener there. And I think that there's a number of things you have to look at. But first of all, you shouldn't panic, and you shouldn't try to time the markets. No one can do that. If you ever meet anybody that says they can time the markets, then you need to run because they're probably going to take your money. And we can say that jokingly, but the reality is that there are folks out there that say that they can time the markets and they've got a great algorithm that will run and you'll make tons of money. And we haven't seen that anywhere. And I'm reminded of King Solomon's words of that there's nothing new under the sun. I know that means something different as far as his relationship with God, but it kind of reminds us of that you have to be leery of things out there that say that they can protect you and they know to time the top and they know where the bottom is of the markets. And that's just not the case. But you can, and this is what we do in our office, you can manage the risk in your portfolio. And if you see things start to turn down and so forth, you have to assess the situation as to whether there is too much risk. Now, we can't get into exactly all the different things that we do with that, but we are active managers of our clients' money, and we are constantly measuring the risk. And that risk comes in many forms. It comes in terms of market risk. It comes in terms of interest rate risk, like the Fed beginning to raise interest rates.
Right.
There's all sorts of external types of risk that we face. Too many for us to talk about in the show. But yes, for this listener that sent in the message, the question, there are things that you can do to protect your portfolio, but you have to be actively involved or you have to engage the services of a qualified financial advisor that I think takes a biblical worldview towards your money and helps you manage that risk. Next week, we're actually going to talk about in a segment, we're going to talk about what you need to look for when you're looking for a financial advisor. And so thank you for your question. That's a good one there.
Yeah.
Jesse, anything you want to add there?
No, I think you had a great response. If you would love to learn more about what we do and the specific things on how we protect clients' money, you should join us for a webinar. We're going to get more into detail on what happens when the market turns south. But yeah, we have a monthly marketing or a monthly market update on February 5th. We encourage you to join that.
Yeah, the first Saturday of every month, we do that right after the show around 9:15 Central Time, and we encourage you to add because we kind of give a more in-depth analysis than what we can offer on the radio program, and plus you're able to see what we're looking at as well. So that's really helpful for some folks to be able to visually see those things. So, Jesse, we may come back to the mailbag if we have time towards the end of the
Sure.
show, but I wanted to talk about, and this is really something important for parents of all ages, because, a few weeks ago we got a question from a listener that came in, and he was asking about how do you plan for your estate to pass on your wealth, and it really starts in the early stages of what you're teaching your children about money and how to manage money. Jesse, did your parents teach you? Did they sit down with you and show you different things about money, or did you just kind of pick it up on your own?
No, I was blessed to have awesome parents. Shout out to my parents if you're listening. I don't know if you are, but um, they really
Thank
did
you,
a
Mr. and
great.
Mrs. Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks, mom and dad. They they taught me a lot of excuse me, great things about how to handle money from a young age. One specific story comes to mind, and if anybody is a fan of our podcast from last year, I might have shared this on the podcast. But when I was a little kid, I still remember the time that I earned my first wages ever from my parents, and so I don't know how old I was. Excuse me, sorry, maybe 6 or 7, and living in central Middle Tennessee. And what happened was there's a thunderstorm. We get a lot of thunderstorms, lots of wind blowing, and sticks blew all over our yard. We have a big yard. And I pointed it out to my parents, and they said, well, if you go out there sometime and pick up all the sticks and put them in a pile and move them to our compost pile, we'll pay you. And so I'm this little kid, and I'm like, dollar signs start going through my head, Mark. And and so I like planned for it. I made a big day of it, and for a little kid, this is a big deal.
Yeah,
And I went out and did a great job. I cleared out the whole yard, and came back in, and my dad handed me $10.
awesome. That's big
So
money
yeah, that's
for
big
for a
money.
6-year-old. Yeah,
But
yeah.
anyways, that's a specific story of I remember my parents teaching me to work hard, and you can get rewarded for it.
Yeah, so there's lots of life examples that we can earn. I don't think I ever, a lot of parents want to give their kid an allowance, and my wife and I really we talk about this, and we decided that there are certain things that every child could do that was just part of their contribution to the household. So, like making your bed, you shouldn't get paid, in our mind anyway, you shouldn't get paid for making your bed, right? Now, that's a little more challenging for a 4-year-old to be able to make the bed, but certainly it's not that hard for them to be able to pick up their toys in the room. So there's certain responsibilities that we had as children or we teach our children that they have to do and contribute to be part of the family, like take out the trash or something. But then there's other chores that they can do in which they can earn money, and we try to, and I give a lot of programs to preschooler moms groups like MOPS and things like that. And if your MOPS groups wants a speaker sometime, I know y'all look for those all the time. Give us a shout, give us a call in our office, and we'll be happy to have one of our advisors come and give you a talk. But we're going to get into a little bit of that today. But remember, Jesse, there are money priorities in American culture. We've talked about this
Yes.
before, and that's to fund your lifestyle. Go into debt to fund it if you need to. Save a little bit for a rainy day and give some away if there's anything left. And we know that God's wisdom for this is the exact opposite. He wants us to give first, save for the future. We don't want to use debt if we don't have to, but we can use it prudently. It's not a sin to use debt. And then finally, fund your lifestyle. So we've taken this approach with folks, and we want to make sure that we share that with you, but we do it really simply. And we'll get into that. And but I think, Jesse, we've got a caller that wants to ask a question. Jim, are you on the
Great.
line? Caller Jim, you there? Daniel, we're not getting the feed from the studio, so I don't know if Jim is asking a question there.
Yeah, the
Okay.
input we have is that Jim is asking about in-depth funds and government spending. So
Okay. All
hopefully
right.
we can get him on the line
Hopefully
soon.
Daniel will get him on the line here in a second, and Daniel, just interrupt us when you have him. But we'll go back to Jim here in just a moment so we can get him back on the line. So, we started with a simple principle of really. I wish I had a picture of it. I would put it on the Facebook live stream. I couldn't find it this morning, but we started each child with 3 mason jars, and the 3 mason jars, and we put them in this order. One jar says giving, one jar says saving, and the third jar says spending. Okay, and that giving, saving, and spending are the first 3 things in God's priority for the use of our money. Okay. Um, and we want to make sure that we instill those things in our children. And so we do this. We start at a very early age. For that, if they get an allowance, which I'm happy to hear from our listeners exactly what they're doing for our children, and we'll do that. But giving, saving, spending are the 3 priorities you want to try to teach your children. Oh, well, we got Jim back on the line. Okay, so go ahead, Jim. Studio, we're not getting a feed. All right, maybe Jim can give the question to our producer, and he'll type
And he
that in the
can
chat.
type it into the chat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry about that, Jim. We wanted to have you on the air. Thanks for your patience, and we'll try to get that answer as best we can. So anyway, so we're talking to our children about these things. We start as early as 3 and 4, where we're talking about that, but these principles carry on, and I know that even our teenage children still have that approach now that they learn that they know that when they get money, even gifts, that they need to give or tithe, they need to save some of it, and then they get to enjoy the rest of it. And we need to adopt that as well.
So are you
So
saying that every time that the child gets money, they're going to consider the jars?
That's right. That's right. Just constantly reminds them of those 3 principles. And we found this to be very successful. Now, parents have lots of different opinions on an allowance and things and what they have to do for that. Some parents just want to give them an allowance regardless. That's fine. That's your prerogative. We try to make them do certain things so that they are earning that. It might be taking out the trash, or it might be for the younger ones emptying, um, keeping their room clean and stuff. So anyway, we just teach those principles, and we do the same things with our teenage children. We hope we instill in that. So our oldest is working at Chick-fil-A, and so she knows that when she gets a paycheck, some of that's going to giving or tithing, and she's going to save some of it, and then she can enjoy some of it as well. But that pattern there is really what we need to be doing as adults, right?
Right.
And if you're driving, parents, you might want to pull over, because what I'm about to tell you is going to surprise you and shock you. But kids really learn and really glean the most of what they learn about money from watching you handle your money. Now, some of you are starting to sweat, right? Because you realize that maybe we're not handling money the way that God wants us to. Maybe we're not having a really systematic way of developing a spending plan, having giving and saving for the future. And that's okay. That's part of why we do this show. We want you to be able to model your lifestyle of what God has to say about that, and then teach that to your children. But the reality is, they see children will watch how you handle money, and you need to be deliberate about talking about money with your kids.
Yeah, Mark, my wife and I are yet to have kids. Someday we will, but
Do
I
you
feel like I
talk
can.
about money with Bean, your dog?
Yeah, the little dog. No,
Okay.
we don't talk about money with him. But I was just thinking about how much more valuable and more special it is for somebody to understand these difficult topics about money at such a young age. In single digits of age, they're going to see if you as the parent are doing something, they're going to see that and see the value in that. and it's
Yeah.
just going to be something that's always in their mind and it's
Well,
foundational
and
for
I can
them.
remember too my parents stressing about money. Both my parents were
Really?
teachers and stuff. Yeah, I remember times when money was tight, and if you're a dual teacher household, money's tight usually all the time. But because we don't pay our teachers enough. But if you watch this thing, I remember them stressing about money. How are they going to pay the bills and stuff? I never did really get from my dad, how he managed money, but I witnessed it indirectly in his office, in his study. He would have a one of those desktop pads, Jesse, those big
Yeah.
ones.
Uh-huh.
And I would see his notes about, he was talking about, here's his income, here's what bills he's got to pay. Oh yeah, he needs to feed us kids and stuff like that too. So I could see that how he was kind of going through that process, and I picked up on some on that just by seeing, what was on his desk.
Mhm.
And so, we kids will learn those things, and you have to be deliberate about that. Now, in this electronic and digital age, it's a little bit different, right? Because Jesse, do you have a checkbook? I didn't
I
ask you.
do.
Oh, you do? Okay, all right. So you're kind of a rarity among the millennial generation of
Yeah, I
actually
am.
having a checkbook.
Mhm.
But if you tie to the church, you want to involve your kids. If you're paying bills, sometimes you want to involve your kids because you need to show them that it takes mom or dad or one or the other to earn money in order to be able to buy the things that you have, like the food on the table and like, being able to pay the mortgage or the
Right.
rent and so forth. Okay, so the studio's back. We're going to see if we can get Jim on the line again. Jim, we're going to try it one more time. Third time is a charm, right?
All right. Can you hear me now?
We
Yes,
can
there we
hear you
go.
now. Thanks, Jim.
Okay, great. Here's a question / comment. How the federal government's supposed to have a lot of smart people in it, right? And how can they be spending all of these trillions and trillions of dollars and not know that inflation is going to be the result of all that?
Well,
And
Jim,
then I guess my next sort of follow-up question is, I remember Warren Buffett saying, all you really need to do is follow the index funds, and you don't really even need to pay attention to all those other stocks. I mean, is that really a sound strategy? And if so, what kind of index funds should people be looking at?
well, I think there's a really in-depth conversation we need to have there, Jim, about the federal government and so forth. I found it shocking to see the White House say that they didn't realize that they were surprised by the inflation. And when you pump trillions and trillions of dollars into an economy, you're going to have inflation, and you're going to have a lot of it. So either the folks in Washington are burying their heads in the sand, or they're fully aware of it and then want you to believe that you shouldn't worry about it, but you should. And so, to your second point there, Jim, what following the indexes, even Warren Buffett gives advice like that, but he's a value investor. And we saw an article the other day about from Jeremy Grantham, one of the godfathers of value investing. And
Yes.
he's really concerned about the bubble that we're about to have pop because the indexes, and we talked one time on the show, the indexes are indicative of the things that they're measuring. And when you look at the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, they're really driven by 4 or 5 companies. And that is concerning to us. We think that you should be careful about investing in indexes. That's what most 401k plans is. They have those indexes. They might have a large cap fund. They might have a small cap fund, et cetera. But next week on the show, Jim, listen in because I think we'll talk more about those types of indexes and how you can listen. You can also send us in um, a question at radio@spendlifewell.com. But we want to thank you for participating in today's show. We'll join you, God willing, next week here on the Spend Life Well show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.